Well, it's time to get into the sentiments driving media analytics this week and the social and corporate trends of the week on social media. And JP Klopp is a welcome new guest to the studio, Chief Executive of Brands Eye, and he joins me now to talk about the highlights of the media this week. But tell us also, JP, quickly what Brands Eye is.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. We're a technology business, and we provide our clients and analysts with software which allows them to track media across print, radio, but predominantly social, which is what we're talking about tonight.
And that's the one that's difficult to track because it's all over.
That's right.
So, and you've got something called the Mood Index.
We do, yeah. So one of the things which we do, which is quite unique, is we blend crowdsourcing and machine learning to be able to figure out what's driving sentiment on social media. And we've developed these indices, which we're going to be talking about every week, to try and look at how do consumers feel about these particular verticals and what's driving the sentiment shifts week on week.
Okay, well, let's have a look. Let's look at the Mood Index now of the week.
Insurance sector, and what we see there is the volume. And if we go back to looking how the sentiment shifts over time, we can see as the sentiment moves, we can actually drill into it to go and look at what's driving that sentiment to be able to figure out like what are brands doing well and what are brands doing poorly. And in this case, that's on this particular segment, we see with Budget Insurance, they had an issue where just one person posted an experience on Facebook.
Is that reflected there on the?
It is, yeah. We see the spike that's going to come up now. We're comparing 4 of the insurers here. There's Budget, Outsurance, MyWay, and Dial Direct. And we see that peak there. The gray part is the volume, and the red line is the negative sentiment.
Yeah.
And what happened there is it was just one lady's Facebook post about a negative experience that she had in a claim, and it just catalyzed on Facebook, generated 7,000 shares and 3,000 comments on that particular post. And what that meant for the brand was they suddenly had this PR disaster that they needed to deal with, when in actual fact they were in the right in terms of their claims process. They just hadn't outlined exactly how that works. So it happens often now, particularly in these sort of high-touch service industries, where a customer has an experience and they don't necessarily understand the terms and conditions, but the power of social media is so vast that they can put this experience out there, gather a whole lot of support for their case. And what we worked out for Budget Insurance, that just the direct impact of this particular Facebook post probably cost them of the order of 12 million rand in lost revenue.
Yo.
Just in the people in the comments who said we're going to cancel.
Is that the original comment?
That's the original post.
Yeah. So it's not only a vast influence, it's a fast influence. I mean,
Exactly.
It's virtually instant. So when a company responds to this, they need this in order to respond very quickly, don't they?
They do. I think that they need this, and they need to have people who are thinking on their feet. Because one of the mistakes Budget made it here, and we often see customers do it, is they respond with a very generic message that says, please can you DM us your details and we'll get hold of you.
Let's now look at Trend Tracker, which is another part of this project, the software.
Trend Tracker, here we're looking at just the weekly trends. And one of the trends we saw emerge this week, which is quite interesting, was comparing Game of Thrones to Agazi. Now, Game of Thrones over the past, it's actually more than a week, generated only 922 mentions. Whereas Agazi, if you look there, it's over 10,000 mentions that have come through on about that show. And while the number of white people is double on Agazi, the number of black people who commenting on that show is more than 10 times the number of Game of Thrones. So we found that really interesting, that just in these trends this week, that they're the kind of global influences like Game of Thrones, but actually what is resonating with South Africans is local content, which was really great to see.
We still have the old racial divisions. So much longer are we going to have these?
Well, that's a good question. I think as long as it gives us handles to have relevant conversations to try and move the narrative forward, I think that's one of the things we've really tried to stretch ourselves in, is to provide just solid facts and data about who's speaking about what, so that we can objectively look at an issue to be able to figure out what's going on.
So what kind of traction has this got now? What's your reach with this technology?
Well, we've got crowds through Africa, throughout Europe, in the Middle East, Turkey, Russia, so we can process data in any language really around the world. And the beautiful thing about social media is it is global in its very sort of concept.
We have to ask about the downgrades being the topic of discussion this evening. So how would you enable people to react to that kind of topic?
So the downgrades was interesting. I was actually disappointed at how low the conversation was. It only started trending at about 5 to 6 this evening. And we see this was a tweet which somebody put out, which was quite interesting, just showing over the past 20 years just what the downgrade status has moved by through the different presidencies. And I think one of the things which social media is good at is, for me as a non-economist, this was very insightful to see, okay, we may have missed the downgrade this time, but according to that graph, we've got a problem in the future.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So we're going to see JP Kloppers again, I'm sure, as the Chief Executive of Brands Eye.